Earnings per share. So, the objectives by the end of the chapter, you should be able to define earnings per share and the P/E ratio. Comment critically on the P/E ratio of an enterprise in comparison with the industry average. Calculate the basic and diluted earnings per share. Investor ratio. Investor ratio, the market price and performance of a company's shares indicate what investors think of a company. Market price, the price people are willing to buy and sell the shares of a company for, includes information about how investors see the potential risk and return connected with owning a part of the company. Companies are diverse. They have different number of issues, shares, differing levels of profits and dividends, differing activities, industries, and differing future prospects. Investor ratio. To get the necessary information to enable an investment decision to be made, the following ratios need to be considered: earnings per share, price or earnings ratio, dividend per share, dividend yield, dividend cover, net tangible asset backing per share. Price earnings P/E ratio measures the ratio of the current market price of the ordinary shares to the EPS of the ordinary shares. Useful for comparing different companies. Tells how many years the investor is prepared to wait to recover the price of the shares at the current rate of return. P/E ratio. Market price per share over earnings per share EPS. If a company's P/E ratio is higher than that of other companies, investors expect its profits and dividends and share price to grow more quickly than those of the other companies. Dividends per share shows how much of the net profit is paid to shareholders for each ordinary share they hold. Normally, DPS will be less than EPS because companies prefer to retain part of the net profit to help fund future expansion. The formula is DPS is dividend per share is equal to dividends paid to ordinary shareholders over number of ordinary shares. Dividend yield. The ratio of dividend per share to the share's market price. It measures the percentage of the share's value that is returned each year as dividends to the shareholder. Preference shareholders, whose main reason for investing is to receive dividends, pay special attention to this ratio. The formula is dividend yield is equal to dividends per share over current market price. Net tangible asset backing per share NTA, also called the book value per share, shows how much the shareholder can expect to get back should the company cease operations. It assumes that the value of the assets shown in the balance sheet is a fair indication of the price that would be obtained if they were sold. The formula is NTA is equal to total net assets less intangible assets over number of ordinary shares. Earnings per share. IAS 33 calculation of basic EPS. BEPS after bonus issue, share split, new issue, buyback of shares and rights issue. Calculate diluted EPS treatment where there are several potential dilutions. Why EPS is important? Component of P/E ratio. Typical press extract. Breweries, pubs, restaurants. Company price 31st of March 98, P/E ratio and EPS. Company A, Company B, and Company C. The prices and the P/E ratio and their EPS. Factors that affect the PE ratio continued. Investors' confidence, external influences, current year's performance, potential changes and possible future implication, management change, replacing, failing, recruiting successful, high growth prospects, high PE ratio, poor growth prospects, high PE if takeover likely. Earnings per share. EPS is the amount of net profit per share of the company's ordinary shares. The formula is EPS net profit after taxes and preference dividends over number of ordinary shares issued. The net profit available for paying dividends to the ordinary shareholders is used. Preference dividends and taxes are deducted because the preference shareholders and the Inland Revenue Department have prior claims on the profit. Earnings per share (EPS) is the amount of net profit per share of the company's ordinary shares. The formula is EPS net profit after taxes and preference dividends over number of ordinary shares issued. The net profit available for paying dividends to the ordinary shareholders is used. Preference dividends and taxes are deducted because preference shareholders and the Inland Revenue Department have prior claims on the profit. Earnings per share. Basic calculation. Basic EPS earnings over weighted number of ordinary shares. Net profit is the profit for the period attributable to the parent entity after deduction preference dividends, assuming preference shares or equity instruments. The weighted average number of ordinary shares would be adjusted for every other than the conversions of potential ordinary shares that have changed the number of ordinary shares outstanding without a corresponding change in resources. An ordinary share is an equity instrument that is subordinate to all other classes of equity. Earnings per share diluted calculation. Diluted EPS is defined as follows. For the purpose of calculating diluted earnings per share, the net profit attributable to ordinary shareholders and the weighted average number of shares outstanding should be adjusted for the effects of all dilutive potential ordinary shares. This means that both the earnings and the number of shares used may need to be adjusted from the amounts that appear in the profit and loss account and balance sheet. Dilutive means that earnings in the future may be spread over a larger number